37. 26 knots down the Eagle. 106 interval is a Rhino at 5. Sure, sir. 207 on flat path on course 1 mile. Sure, sir. 207 on flat path on course.
By the 12th of April 1945, just 3 weeks after the British Second Army crossed the River Rhine in Germany, the 11th Armoured Division had established 2 bridgeheads across the River Aller, one in the west at Essel and the other slightly to the east at Engerhausen. The latter bridgehead was being held by troops of 159 Brigade, specifically the 1st Battalion, the Cheshire Regiment, which on the 12th of April was preparing to expand the bridgehead towards the town of Winson, when, as Major General George Roberts, the divisional commander, recalls. 2 German officers with a large white flag appeared on our front. Firing ceased and the white flag party were told to come forward and were in due course led to Brigadier John Churcher, Commander 159 Brigade. He reported back to me saying that in front of us was a camp of seriously ill people who should not be allowed to roam the countryside because of the danger of disease. It appeared that the Germans were prepared to withdraw from the area so that no fighting could take place around this camp. When the German officers arrived at my headquarters, I found that the line to which they were prepared to withdraw was not sufficient to enable our artillery to establish themselves beyond the camp, and that we would end up having an artillery duel with a camp in the middle. Eventually, General Roberts, unable to agree a withdrawal line with the German officers, sent the delegation onto 8 Corps headquarters, where further proposals, followed by counter-proposals, were issued until a final agreement was made. A 48 square kilometre exclusion zone be established around this camp, in which no fighting was to take place. In the meantime, whilst these negotiations were underway, a 2-man patrol, consisting of Lieutenant John Randall and his jeep driver, a Corporal Brown, both of the 1st S.A.S. Regiment, were operating behind enemy lines in a large wooded area, several kilometres in front of the 11th Armoured. Given the nature of their mission, which was principally reconnaissance, the 2 S.A.S. troopers had been out of contact with British forces for several days, and as such were oblivious to the exclusion zone that had been established around the area they were operating in. Nonetheless, the 2 men continued on with their tasking, which ultimately led them, on the morning of the 15th of April, to stumbling across a dirt track flanked by a set of open gates that branched off from the main route. Believing it led to a manor, possibly serving as a German army headquarters, Lieutenant Randall ordered Corporal Brown to turn in and follow the track. No sooner had they done so were they hit by a strong, overpowering stench that was followed, a few minutes later, by the appearance of a 10-foot-high barbed wire fence intersected by several guard towers that led to another set of open gates. Initially, Lieutenant Randall assumed it was a prisoner of war camp, but, as he recalls, "We drove through these gates because they are open. There were 1 or 2 totally dejected-looking German guards, but they made no effort to shoot. About 30 yards into the camp, my jeep was suddenly surrounded by a group of around 100 emaciated prisoners. Most of them were in black and white striped prison uniforms, and the rest wore a terrible assortment of ragged clothes. It was the state of these inmates that made me realise that this was no ordinary prisoner of war camp. When I told them we were British, they went wild, pleading for food, help, protection, and release." What Lieutenant John Randall and Corporal Brown had stumbled across was the Bergen-Belsen Concentration Camp, which, at the time of their arrival, was holding an estimated 60,000 prisoners and a further 10,000 unburied corpses. It would turn out that this was in fact the camp that the Germans had surrendered 3 days earlier. Several hours after the arrival of the S.A.S, at around midday on the 15th, an official British delegation, headed by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Taylor, commander of the exclusion zone, arrived at Bergen-Belsen to assess the conditions inside the camp. On arrival, Lieutenant Colonel Taylor met with senior German figures who were responsible for the camp's administration, among them Joseph Kramer, the SS camp commander, Irma Grez, who had been responsible for the female prisoners, and Karl Harries, who served as a liaison officer between the SS and the German army. Shortly thereafter, the colonel was joined by a small medical party headed by Brigadier Glyn Hughes, 2nd Army's Deputy Director of Medical Services, who, together with Lieutenant Colonel Taylor and Joseph Kramer, conducted an inspection of the camp. Brigadier Hughes later recalled, "The conditions in the camp were really indescribable. No description nor photograph could really bring home the horrors. There were various sizes of piles of corpses lying all over the camp. Near the crematorium were signs of filled-in mass graves, and outside to the left of the bomb compound was an open pit half full of corpses. Huts which should have contained at the most 80 to 100 prisoners, in some cases had as many as 1,000. Some of the huts had bunks but not many, and they were filled absolutely to overflowing with prisoners in every state of emaciation and disease. Joseph Kramer was quite callous and indifferent. He was unashamed." Following this inspection, a message was sent out to 8th Corps and 2nd Army headquarters, requesting that food, water and medical assistance be sent to the camp as soon as possible. Although there was a significant number of British units in the vicinity, getting this assistance on the scene proved no easy task, for many of these units were preoccupied at the time of Belsen's liberation. Not to mention the fact that 2nd Army was simply ill-prepared for the scale of the humanitarian crisis that had been left at its doorstep. Nonetheless, a field hygiene section was able to be deployed to the camp on the 15th of April, followed by a further 3 medical units on the 17th, whilst combat troops, who were passing through the area on the way to the front line, provided their own rations and supplies to help in any way possible. However, as the National Army Museum states, "The army rations had a negative effect on the weakened prisoners. Their malnourished bodies could not cope as the food was so much richer than what they were used to." On top of the food, water and sanitation problems, Brigadier Glyn Hughes, who had assumed command of the relief efforts, also had to fight the typhus epidemic that had broken out inside the camp. Consequently, in an effort to try and alleviate the situation, the Brigadier directed that a German army barracks to the north be turned into a hospital and a displaced persons camp. According to Brigadier Hughes, these facilities were to be used for the supposedly fit and well, thereby making more room in the camp's huts and supervision of feeding easier. The fact that there was a good barrack area which can be converted into a hospital undoubtedly saved the situation. Within 4 weeks, this temporary hospital would see some 29,000 former prisoners pass through its facilities, to be cleaned, deloused, medically treated, and strictly supervised with their diet, prior to beginning the process for repatriation. In addition, the use of these barracks as a medical centre also saw the eradication of the typhus epidemic by the end of April 1945, with Brigadier Hughes making the assessment that if we could do it with the few personnel we had available till victory in Europe had occurred, they, the Germans, could have done it much more easily with the number which they had actually in the neighbourhood when we arrived. We stamped out the outbreak of typhus within a fortnight of arriving with 68 men. Joseph Kramer had many more men available than that, and in the neighbouring barracks were 3,800 German and Hungarian soldiers. Another turning point came on the 2nd of May when 97 medical students arrived from London to help out at the main camp, and whose presence provided Brigadier Hughes sufficient manpower to properly care for the prisoners, as he recalled after the war. Their arrival proved the greatest help, and with their advent, the death rate, which in the earliest days had been 500 per day, began to drop appreciably. With their knowledge and enthusiasm, we were able to exercise much better supervision of each hut. They worked splendidly. By the 21st of May 1945, the situation at Bergen-Belsen had drastically improved, with all the prisoners having been relocated to better accommodation, and the 10,000 plus corpses had been buried by German and Hungarian soldiers into mass graves. Once the final victim had been buried, troops from the 43rd Wessex and 79th Armoured Divisions were instructed to burn Bergen-Belsen to the ground to prevent the spread of any further diseases. From the moment the first British troops had arrived at the camp on the 15th of April 1945, news of what had unfolded at Bergen-Belsen had been reaching the nearby villages and towns, with many German civilians refusing to believe that such a camp had existed. As a result, the British command began showing films and distributing leaflets detailing the Bergen-Belsen Concentration Camp, with one such leaflet concluding with the following. This camp is only one of many in this country. It is easy to deny responsibility owing to a lack of knowledge. It is easy to say that you've been unfortunate and have been in the grip of the S.A.S. and Gestapo. But those of you who still aspire to equality with your fellow men would do well to reflect that your brothers, sons and fathers of the German army saw some of the things related above daily. These men had weapons in their hands and took no action. The defeated German army, which you have seen in the past days marching through this area, know about these things. The German army handed over Belsen camp through fear of disease, and it was left to others to clean up the mess.